to the World According to Chris podcast, where we help you build the perfect side business for you and your family. Today's conversation is a really cool conversation with another podcaster, but more importantly, he's a father, he's a friend, he's a husband, and the other cool part is this. In today's conversation, not only are we going to talk about his journey, but we're also going to cover a lot about how he came up with the Dear Son podcast. If you're not familiar with it, the link is in the description below, but I guarantee after this interview, you're probably going to fall in love with it. So I want y'all to listen in to my interview with Derek, the host and the creator of the Dear Son podcast. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce to some and present to others the man, the myth, the legend of the Dear Son podcast, my guy, Derek. Derek, how you doing today, man?
I'm feeling fantastic, man. I appreciate being on your platform. That intro, I'm a little taken aback, man. I'm gonna have to live up to it.
Hey, absolutely, man. Listen. I think what you're doing is so timely and unique right now. Here's what I want you to do. Give everybody an understanding of the city, state you in, a little bit about your family dynamics, and tell everyone about what the Dear Son podcast actually is.
Easily. So I am located in Grand Prairie, Texas, considered part of the DFW area, probably about 10 miles outside of Dallas. I'm here because of work by way of the 757. I'm from Hampton, Virginia. I will always say that. I have a beautiful family. I'm a husband to one wife. We have 5 children. They are 18, 16, 14, 8, and 7. Honor, Imani, Donovan, Eden, and Eli. 3 girls, 2 boys. By day, I am a supply chain executive. I work for a government contractor. That's the lesser part of this story. The Dear Son podcast, which has become my purpose, was really born out of a self-reflection. As I mentioned, I have 2 sons. They are 14 and 7. And I realized about a year ago that my oldest son was coming to the age that I was when I started creating issues with my father as it pertains to communication. So I had a great father. I always have to preface that. He wanted nothing but the best for me, but I didn't want his information. And in short, that lack of information left me ill prepared to go out into the world. So I went out in the world and I made a ton of mistakes with women, finances, in job setting. And after a space of time, me and my father connected. It wasn't as if we disconnected, but I started asking questions that I should have asked or seeking information that I should have asked years before then. And I found out that, he had some stories that parallel with mine. And I said, man, I really could have used this information, 10 to 15 years ago. But it wasn't his fault. He was from a generation where his father didn't really talk to him. He was honing or learning how to communicate with a son, especially a son that was becoming a man, on the fly. He lost his father when he was 20. So we suffered from that communication gap, and I was, kind of cyclical in my family, and probably most families, I would imagine, at least in the African American community. So essentially, I had to assess why my communication, what communication challenges I had with my son, why. Had a conversation with my father about it, understood some things about him to help me understand some things about me, and now I'm looking to have these conversations to stop that negative cycle in my family and share it with the world. So that's how the podcast was born.
Man, that is cool. So I'm really curious about kind of how we got here. So with your current job, right? You're working every day. You're doing your role.
Yeah.
Was it like a inkling to start a podcast? Was it like I just want to talk to different people about kind of maybe their experiences that I'm having? What was kind of the lynch pin or the fire spark that got you going down this path of going, I actually want to build something outside of my regular job that's already taxing, but now I got something out here brewing. What was kind of that thing that kind of got you there?
So that goes back a couple of decades, actually, and it's attached to my father. not oddly enough, as it, in theme with what this podcast is. My father and I at one time worked for the same company. He had worked there a lot longer than I had, and they gave me a chance, gave me an employment opportunity because of him and his character. Probably around the 3 year mark for me, but the 23-year mark for him. He came to the office one day and they pulled him aside and said, "Hey, your position is a luxury we can no longer afford." And that was the extent of the conversation. Well, they did tell him that he can work his last 2 weeks or he can leave that day. The payout is going to be the same. He continued to work because that's his character, and he was a phenomenal employee, always on time. I don't remember my father taking a sick day ever in my life, except for the time when he had surgery, right? And that's uncontrollable. But for him to, I don't feel like going to work today, that was never a thing. So that aha moment for me, and I still worked at the company, let me know that, oh, this is temporary, right? You're just a number, you're replaceable. And having to see these people every day for the next 2 years that I worked there after he was terminated just did something to me, right? So from that point on, I knew I had to do something. And I had I had my bouts with entrepreneurship, trying to do things. I was a marketing major, and I would do a lot of helping people brand their business and take it to market, but I was always doing it as a favor. I really didn't know how to price myself because I wasn't confident. I didn't have the receipts at the time to tell somebody, look, I did this. They were giving me opportunities to help. So that's where the entrepreneurial spirit was born. And, that continued over the years, having some success, having some failures. And fast forward to where I am now, I've always had the mindset of corporate is not forever. But while I was in corporate and while I'm in corporate, I'm competitive. So I'm going to try to ascend the ladder as quickly as possible, as high as possible. And I managed to do that by the grace of God. So I've had some amazing opportunities in corporate, but I know it's a numbers game. And at the time of this recording, my company is being bought out. So the resulting factor may be me getting pushed into the entrepreneurial space anyway. So the podcast, my wife and I actually started a podcast back in 2019, and it was good for us. It was therapeutic, but we weren't consistent. In 2020, literally God placed it on my heart to do the Dear Son podcast. Again, trying to understand the communication challenges with my son and a way to work through that. I knew podcasting was good for getting thoughts out. I was terrified for about a year to do it. So if your audience goes to my audio channels on Spotify or any of the other platforms, my trailer went up September 2020. My first episode didn't go up until September 2021. And I joined a podcast mastermind class. It started with a challenge that Dave Shands does. I'm sure your audience is familiar. If they're not, they need to get familiar with Mr. Dave Shands and the Social Proof podcast. And that gave me the structure to understand the cadence, what I needed to do to form a business around this, this journey that I'm going through. So that's really what I'm in the process, what I've done in just building from that foundation.
Man, that is so cool. So let's talk about, like, you mentioned this entrepreneurial journey that you went on before you got to the podcast.
Yeah.
All right, spill the beans. How many crazy and exploratory things did you let your mind go to and try out before the podcast? I mean, like, how many different things did you try? Did you fail at? Did you go, that will never be me? Like, what was that journey like?
Yes. I would say at least 4 or 5 that I really put some effort in. I always have ideas, right? There's a thing that comes across my mind and I immediately start searching how, is it available in the marketplace? Can I turn it into a business? And I may take some steps, but not really be serious. But I would say, about 4 or 5 things that I told people I was doing as an entrepreneur.
So here's my other question. What was the mental game like? What were you like when you finally, before you committed that I'm going on this journey?
Yeah.
What was like what were you scared? Were you like, man, this is crazy. I can't be working a job and trying to build a side business. What was kind of that mental space that you were going through as you were kind of laying the foundation mentally? Because most of us, it happens up here before we start walking it out, right? So what was
Yeah.
that kind of process for you?
Yeah, I think younger years, late 20s, I was too stupid to be scared. Right, I was too
I like
fearless
that.
to be scared, and I just kind of jumped into things,
Yeah.
which had its benefits. I don't regret anything that I've done. All of it has taught me. All of it is built to the information, the filter that I have today to do things, differently and adjust as I need to. Honestly, the podcast is probably the thing I was the most fearful of. I literally think I could do anything, and I'm not. This is not tooting my. I just believe if I really want to do something, I can figure it out. I'll research it. I'll talk to the right people, and I'll figure it out. Now, after when it comes to executing and staying committed, that was a lot of my struggle earlier. But I had no problem jumping into a business, even if people said I shouldn't. I would lose interest really quickly, and I realized that I can't keep doing things only because they're a good idea or they can be monetized. At this stage of my life, I really have to do things that revolve around my life and my family.
Yeah. So I want to talk about your family because most people who would, venture out, to build a side business sometimes forget they've got to incorporate the family dynamics, right?
Yeah,
So you have 5 children and a wonderful wife that everybody deserves your attention, right?
yeah, yeah.
Talk to me about like how you and your wife had those conversations about the entrepreneurial journey. What were y'all talking about? Where were the landmines that you were jumping on? What were those kind of conversations that you all had to start considering working your job and saying I'm gonna build this side business? Because clearly somewhere time, effort, and energy would start to be pulled in different directions. What was that like?
Yeah, so that's really interesting that you bring that up because the difference at this phase of my life is that we actually had the conversation. Before, I literally came home and said, I'm an entrepreneur. I don't have it figured out, but I quit, right? So I quit my job. It's laughable now, and my wife has forgiven me, at least uh, as I believe. My wife was getting out of the military. She was in the Air Force. We were having a third child, and we both agreed that it made sense for her to get out at the 8 year mark, and she was going to be a stay at home mom for some time. At that same time, I made that decision to leave my job because I thought I could figure it out on my own, and I would have more time at home with the kids and the family to be available. And I didn't have a plan, and I failed miserably, and it put us into a bind financially. And to recover, it led to me actually going overseas for a year to work because I could accelerate the earning. And I left my family for a year, went to Iraq to earn some income, and essentially at that point traded my family for money. I give you that context to tell you that I've done it the wrong way. I don't know what the perfect way is, but I am more open with my wife, and not just my wife, my entire family, having the conversations about this is the thing that I'm passionate about. Here's what it looks like. How do you guys feel about it? Of course, I discussed it with my wife first, but I included the family because my kids are of age, and it's dear son, right? So clearly, it indicates that my son or my sons would be in. But I don't want the title to be of the podcast to be so misleading. It's women birth the sons, right? Women are a product of somebody's son and another woman. So it's all parenting, it's all life related. Um, and so that's how it includes my whole family. Now my wife was, like I said, already familiar with the podcasting space because we were doing it together and we still do that. And she recognized that this thing it's actually purpose driven. It's not a flash in the pan moment of excitement that something that another thing that I want to try. It was very intentional about the approach, how the thought process behind it. She believed in it. And I always credit and give my wife grief that she believes in me way too much, right? At this point, we've matured enough to where we can have those conversations and say, I feel this way about this, agree or don't agree, right? And it's not the end if we don't agree with each other. The other part of this evolution is that my wife is an entrepreneur as well. So she gets it, right? She's trying to find her fit in the world outside of motherhood, and she's trying things. So she's an empath to what I'm passionate about and what my purpose is. So the conversations now, number one, are being had. They're not difficult because we're both in different spaces and we have a point of reference of what wrong looks like that gives us the foundation to actually build something that makes a little bit more sense and works for the family.
Hey, I know you're enjoying this episode and I want to say thank you. But if you're like the people that I know, and I think I know you pretty well, you're actually enjoying this and there's other people like you who would like to know that this is something that you pay attention to. So guess what? I need you to hit the subscribe button, but also hit the notifications bell so that way you always know when we're dropping something new. But also, which is more important, share this with somebody that you know is interested in this type of conversation and content, because I guarantee you will add a level of understanding and communication that you probably are looking for from those individuals anyway. And the other cool part is you all will be learning together. So go ahead and subscribe, hit the notifications bell now. And guess what? You'll constantly be reminded of when we drop new content like what you're watching right now. Let's get back to the episode. So I like how you mentioned a moment ago, you went off to go get the bag and you left your family for a year. Now, some would argue, hey, Derek, that's actually not a bad thing because you were making money to take care of the family, right? Temporary come up, right? For a longer impact, right?
Yeah.
And I like how you said, but on the other end, right, you don't know what the perfect version is. That was just the version that you chose, right?
Yeah.
When you made the decision to go leave your family for an entire 365 days, what was going through your mind day after day as you're that far away from your wife, your newborns, right? Your little ones, What was going through your mind as you're working that job and making that money? What was that like?
So this is not a bright spot, because I was in Iraq, I was in Baghdad on a military base during a wartime, right? So you essentially have to detach yourself from everything outside of what's going on in that base because it'll drive you crazy. Like I literally on the flight there, people got off the plane, realized where they were, got back on the plane and went home, never actually went to the work site to do the mission. And the base that I was on was comfortable, but there was still activity. I mean, you would still hear, gunfire. There would be bunker calls. You would see the tracers at night. So unfortunately for me, and I'll just say my decision was to try not to think about things that I really cared deeply about, right? Because I would start to feel a way like the separation anxiety would increase exponentially if I dwelled on how my family was doing. Of course, I didn't forget about them, but from day to day, it's almost like I chose to block it out. And the monetary aspect got us out of a hole, but the familial aspect, the relationships suffered for years. So in hindsight, that's why I say I traded my family for money. And, I get it, I did it. And I understand people that make those drastic decisions. What I would recommend is that you have the full conversation with all parties involved to understand the impact of you making that decision. And that's what I did not do.
Man, so this is interesting. So you make the decision There's some long-term impact, right? Relationally. I think one thing that a lot of people don't consider is that side even of the venture of a side business, and or the portion in between that you chose. Well, I need to go get some money because the job ain't enough. I want to share a quote with you and tell me how this hits you. The man that works all day has no time to make money. The man that works all day has no time to make money. When you think about that quote and you think about the context of what you've been through, right? Leaving for a year, right? Doing what you needed to do. And now having this journey of the podcast, how does that quote kind of resonate with you?
It resonates deeply. Going back to that time that I spent in Iraq, we literally worked 7 12-hour days. So when you do the math, it wasn't smart. I literally worked 2 weeks a week. Didn't see my family. There was nothing else to do but be on that base. So the time money exchange I get. I understood it before, but I was in a desperate situation, and that really taught me that the more you work is not necessarily the more you make, the more it takes from you. So I get that completely. And since then and more recently, I'm looking for ways to earn continuously from a single work act, like a podcast, like a digital product that that we've spoken about, and I'll be tapping into your brain to get some of those out. And again, it has to revolve around my family. So for a short stint, my family and I were we were YouTubers. So that was a thing that my kids enjoyed. They were always on YouTube, and I wanted to understand that world. So that was something that we did together. We got monetized for a bit, but we weren't consistent. But my point is understanding that the dynamic of family time, finding ways to monetize it, and ensuring that we can still spend time during this process. So when I podcast, sometimes my son comes with me. My two youngest, they're 8 and 7. They'll come sit in the chair and they say, hey, they want a podcast. And they will, right? Whether it goes anywhere or not, they're seeing it and they want to understand it and experience it. So it's actually enhancing our relationship as it relates to the podcast specifically.
I like that. So let's go into this then. So you and your wife are both entrepreneurial minded and you're on the ground actually doing the thing, right?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what your wife does with her entrepreneur journey. And then talk to me about how y'all even decided to spend even more time working on a podcast together. Because for some people, right, it's hard for them to work together, right? When they're in a marriage. Yeah. It's like, we do enough at home between the kids and all these other things. I don't know if I want to start a business with you, but you guys started a podcast. Talk a little bit about like what she does as an entrepreneur and the things that she's been through. And then just, how you guys kind of came up with this concept to do a podcast together.
Yeah. So my wife, first of all, is the better half, is the absolute better half. She is wildly creative. If she sees something that she wants to figure it out, she'll figure it out. So she was always, just like me, she was always helping people, always doing makeup for events, for weddings. She makes clothes. She would make clothes for people, make clothes for herself. And she had a passion for jewelry and accessories. So the physical business that she started was a jewelry line called Love Keisha J. Love Keisha J Studios is Etsy. And she does handmade pieces inspired by many things that she sees in life, things that she's passionate about. And people love it, right? She like me, was in her head a little bit about it. And, she had that creativity, but wasn't sure if people were going to love it. Once she got a taste of it, now she has 4 or 5 other businesses that she's mapping out and we're figuring out how to get to. So her primary product offering right now is in the jewelry and accessory space. And she's also launching a luxury event styling business, which is actually pretty big here in the DFW area, and I imagine in some other places. But creating, curating events, date nights, picnics, things like that, but really upscale. And it's amazing to me to see her come into her own, because my goal was to remove any financial stress from her making decisions. And I'll take some, I'll accept credit for doing that. I've done a pretty good job with that. But seeing her just develop and become this businesswoman makes me more attracted to her, right? Not that I needed it, but just that new element of her, wildly attractive, right? And then it makes me want to invest more and discuss things with her. And now that she's feeling the pains of entrepreneurship, she understands me more and understands, that fight and that grit you have to get through it. So it gave us another thing in common, right? We've been married almost 17 years, so it's easy to lose commonalities as you grow into, more mature beings, because who you are when you got married and 15 years later is not exactly the same person. Now the podcast, for us, was another communication thing, right? At that time in 2019, we struggled, and I put a post up before, and it said, married 2005, learn to communicate 2019, message, don't quit. That was our life, right? We looked good as a couple, we presented ourselves well, but we weren't learning each other. So there was a lot of dead space in our marriage. The podcast actually became a place where we were having tough conversations for the first time and just sharing it with whatever audience it caught. So that discipline of appointed times, especially now, we weren't as consistent then, but now the appointed time each week ensures us that we're going to have a conversation in the check-in. The check-in is not for the show. The show requires us to check in with each other, and it becomes a part of our life that stems, facilitates more conversations that aren't on the camera. But that's how it works for us. And it's not, we don't do current events or anything like that. We talk about real life. This week, this is what happened. This is what I learned about me that impacted my wife. This is what I learned about me that impacted my husband. This is what our kids taught us. And with 5 kids, there's never a dull moment. So it's working for us in that vein, and it's actually creating some opportunities for us that I'm excited about.
Dude, man, wow. Okay. So I love the way you put that. You used the podcast as a communication tool. I hope somebody just heard that. Slow that down like DJ Screw and rewind it and play it back. I think that's a dope idea. I would have never even, that is smart. Because here's the cool part. You might have unreleased episodes just because they were a little vulnerable. And you like, hey, we had a chance to talk, but I don't know if we want to drop that one, right? But it was healthy for you. And speaking of healthy, I would imagine that's how we got to the branding of the clothes. And I want to talk about that because I love the gear. As of recording this episode, it is my wife and I's anniversary, and we're actually getting ready to take our pictures with the Healthy Marriage is Dope brand. I love it. I think it's I think what we do a lot of times, right? Like everybody's got a saying, a moniker, a mantra, right? And we're walking billboards. And I always believe that, like, well, why not walk around with something positive, right? Walk around with something that's your truth, right? Or your ideal understanding, right? You might not have it today, but hey, I love when people wear the, billionaire in the making t-shirts and hey, be you. So when I saw what you were doing, first of all, let me say this. The brand reminded me of 2 things. See, I grew up in the 80s. So it gave me like that swag of like the Martin Lawrence show, different world. And like, I was like, yo, I like this. Like, I like the feel, right? And it was just super, super dope. So talk to everybody about like how y'all came up with this Healthy Marriage is Dope line. I just think it's incredible.
Yeah, so that was a pandemic thing, right? It was 2021. 2021 I describe as the most necessary year of my life. So many things happened that I needed to become what I need to be in this phase of life, right? But so if you follow the timeline, 2019, learn to communicate, we started having these conversations. I couldn't have put this out before 2020, maybe 2021, because our relationship wasn't healthy. As we were having these dialogues and starting to like each other again, the love was never lost, but like I like my wife. And if you don't learn that in the pandemic, well, let me rephrase that. The pandemic is the perfect test to understand if you like somebody in your house or not. And everybody checked the box for me. And I believe I checked the box for everybody else in my house. But it was one of those things where marriage isn't perfect. And we're not suggesting that anyone's marriage, especially ours, is perfect. But when it's healthy, it's cool. When you have the tools to resolve conflict, it's not that bad. It doesn't mean that challenges don't happen. It means now when there's a challenge, I don't go to the bar, I don't take a work trip out of the state, out of the country to put space in between us instead of talking about it.
Facts.
We may have to walk away for 30 minutes and gather thoughts, but it's like, you know what? Honestly, I feel this way about it. How do you feel? I feel this way about it. Oh, it's not so different. We just weren't using our words. And when we got to that space, I was like, you know what? Everything I need is in my house. I'm cool with it. And the Martin reference is definitely a hack. I saw this. Not that I came up with the design or the imagery, but I got on my computer because, again, I think I can do anything. So one of the things that I used to do for money was design flyers or programs for people. So I had no problem putting a concept together. So I got on Adobe Illustrator and just came up, used the lettering. And I showed it to my wife, and she was like, yeah. I sent it to my sister. She's 5 years older than me, been married 25 years, I believe, probably 23 at the time. She was like, how do I order? I said, oh, maybe I have something. This time I didn't sit on it. I've sat on a lot of ideas for clothing brands and cool sayings like you were just mentioning. But this one was part of my life. So, again, if it's part of my life, it's not a stretch. And I don't have to worry about what I said before about it because it's going to be consistent part of my life conversation. I said, okay, well, let's get on Fiverr. Let's clean it up. I was familiar with how to print T-shirts and things like that. So we just went with a first run. We launched on April 1st and had, a great amount of support, almost overwhelming. And I had to take a step back and say, whoa, I need to really get the company structure together. And now, we're humming along and it's getting some traction from great folks like you that have more influence than I do at the moment. And some others are gravitating to it. But I think it's just a genuine, it's that simple message. When it's healthy, it's dope. If it's not,
you know what, man,
figure it
you're
out.
saying a lot, and I'm gonna tell you something. So I pay attention to details. I like when people add like whatever their creativity thing is, whatever it is, right? I could be in a movie and I'll see the smallest detail, and I'm like, oh, I like how they did that. Some of y'all don't know this. So in the link in the description is going to be the link to be able to order the sweaters, the socks, the shirts, and all of that, right? But get this, y'all. There's, first of all, the flyest one yet is this white sweater that has the H, the M, the I, the D on it, right?
I'm proud of
Felt carpet feel on the front. Yeah. That's not the cool part. The cool part is the logo. See, y'all ain't think, he ain't think I peeped this. He took the NBA logo and made it when a brother proposes to his woman. When I saw that, I said, hands down, I gotta order this stuff, man. This is about the flyest thing I've ever seen in my life. That detail, brother, kudos to you and your wife, man.
Appreciate that.
That was dope, man. It's the little things. I'm like, and I don't know if people saw that. I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, is that the NBA? Oh, that's good. I was like, oh, that's good.
It's familiar. Yeah, it's familiar. And it's NBA season. And I at one time I thought I was going to the league. I have nothing to support that. But it was just in my mind that, I used to have a love for basketball. So yeah, like that space right there. If I have a zone of genius, is that. I'm not saying that that's the most genius design, but that's where I'm in my element, where I'm creating things that are meaningful to me and people around me.
Yeah, man. I think it's dope. So let's man, so you're having this journey. You start this business. Talk to me about the things that you learned about it being a business as opposed to just doing a hobby. Because there's a lot of people who
Yeah.
say they're starting a side hustle, but they ain't really starting a business, right?
Right.
What were the things that you had to learn or gravitate to or come into the realization of that I got to do this as an actual business while I am actually still working that job, working to that day that, hey, this might turn out full time. You don't know right in the moment that you're doing it. But talk to me about like, what would even the smallest things, what were the things that you had to say, I got to make this a legitimate business so I can earn income? Hey, listen, if you're enjoying this episode, and I know you are, there's something that you could help me out with. So right now I am looking for couples, yes, couples who do business together and have a thriving, successful business. Do you know somebody? Does somebody come to mind? Well, great. Here's what I would like for you to do. Make sure that you share this episode, or down below, there is actually a form that they can fill out and let us know a little bit about their business and what they actually do together. And guess what? You might be the reason that they're actually a guest right here on the World According to Chris podcast. That's right. You could be that reason. So if you know a couple who does business together and does pretty well, I'd love to be able to have them on the show and talk with them so that we can all learn together, because I am sure you're probably wondering, man, is it possible for me and my lady to actually build a business together? Well, I'm gonna tell you right now, my wife and I are doing it together and we are absolutely loving it. But there are so many more couples and I want to make sure that we highlight them. And I know you know some. So go ahead, let me know down below. Also, make sure that you get them the form down below and make sure that they fill it out. Let's get back to the episode.
Yeah. This is a great question, man. And the reality is I had to start listening to myself, right? People starting businesses would ask me about business because I was good at helping folks. I can tell you how to register, how to set up your LLC, accounting software. I'm not an accountant, but like the things that you need to have in place. And I realized that I was never doing it. I was really good at telling people about it, but I couldn't show them the receipts of me doing it. And I would form my company. I would form the LLC, and I would register with the local entities and pay my, file taxes as appropriate. But I didn't have processes and procedures. I didn't have a system. Nobody could walk in and pick up where I left off, and I had to start doing that for the business, right? To be a true business. And the thing about it is I'm responsible for a lot of that stuff in corporate America. Like I see how big businesses run at a very detailed sensitive information level. So I had it. I never took me serious enough to implement it in any of the things that I was doing. As a result, I had more hustles than businesses. I had businesses on paper, but not in terms of actual structure and operation. So, like me and my wife own the company, we have an operating agreement. Like that's an aha moment for a lot of people, but it's something that I knew and I set up for other people and other companies before, but I never took me serious enough. Like a lot of my revelation now is I convinced myself that I'm enough and that I'm worth it. Right. So all of this game that I was giving other people, I need to flip that and set up something for my family.
Man, wow. So I like the fact that you said, you figured out, hey, I'm enough.
Yeah.
And that I should take myself seriously. Talk to the person who might be sitting right now listening to this episode and thinking to themselves, D, I mean, that sounds great. And I'm glad that happened for you. But, I don't know enough to even start a business. And most likely, yeah, I got an idea, but I don't know. I kind of feel a little, imposter syndrome for wanting to even step out there. What would you say to that person who's, they're considering it, but they just, they haven't made that leap yet, and they kind of feel that version of imposter syndrome?
Yeah. First thing I would do is congratulate them on being honest about where they are. Understanding that you don't know everything and that there's some gaps that you need to fill to get to where you want to be. there's enough information available on the internet, on Google, on YouTube. Look up some stories, whatever you're feeling, Google that. That'll return a story or 1,000 about somebody who felt the same way, and will help give you or shape your perspective of why you feel that way, right? And it'll probably lead to some stories of conviction and redemption. And then you have to understand why you feel that way about you. So it's probably not the starting of the business that scares you. There's something inside of you that you haven't dealt with that scares you, and it's impacting your ability to start the business. So I would suggest getting to understand yourself, whether that's through information, like ingesting as much information as you can from credible sources, books, podcasts are great for helping, with mindset. If you have the resources, therapy, to talk through why you feel that way about you, because that was my thing. Like if outside looking in, I'm relatively successful, but not happy. So what benefit is it to be or do what I've done and end up not happy? So seek to understand who you are and why you're in the place that you are, and what those things are, what dots you need to connect internally that will release you to think through the business, to get more engaged in seeking the information and taking the steps to figure out how you can bring your thought or your idea to the market.
Man, so I personally I think I discovered this more as I journeyed deeper into my building a great side business. I hate failing. I hate failure probably more than being embarrassed. I'll take being embarrassed. I don't like to fail. I don't like to fail with my marriage. I don't like to fail with my kids. I don't care what it is. I just don't like failure. In order to build muscle, you must have muscle failure. So there's that, right? I struggled with failure as I got into building my side business and turning it into something that was very lucrative. What did Derek deal with or deals with when it came to the business that you struggled with or that you currently struggle with?
So failure, I would say early on, that fear of failure, it's not so much, it was a fear of failure early on, but now it's more so because my content is artistic or in that vein, it's the what will people think? Will they get, right? That's the struggle, and that's the biggest struggle for a podcast. And I mentioned in another platform that the first podcast that I released probably took me anywhere from 6 to 8 hours to record. It's only 30 or 45 minutes. But the process of start, stop, they won't like it, they don't want to hear it. What I had to get through personally was the story must go out. It is not my responsibility what the story does once it's out. My responsibility is to get the story out. So whatever your story or substitute, whatever the thing, the service or product is that you believe in strongly enough, it must go out. The return on the feedback, depends on what it is, will help you shape it and make it better, or you have to reach your right audience. But for me, at this stage, it's the biggest struggle was releasing it. It's related to my family. It's vulnerable. That part I'm not scared of, but I was very, very afraid of what people were going to think. So that's the struggle. And again, like you said, the muscle failure is part of the muscle building. For me, that's reps. So staying in the community, connecting with you, keeping the process going, so I don't have time to sit and sulk if a piece of content isn't moving like I thought it would. That's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to do the work on me and share it with the people.
Wow. Yeah, I'm gonna write that one down, and you probably gonna see that all over, because
There you go.
I truly believe that's 90% of the work, right? Getting outside of yourself is probably the biggest struggle that this community deals with, is just I got to get outside of myself, right? And you know, here's the interesting thing. Um, I learned a different lens of selfishness by getting outside of myself, right? Because I realized I was so selfish and arrogant enough to believe that it had to be perfect when all around us there's very imperfect, very lucrative businesses happening every day, right? Um, and we forget that, right, when it comes to us, right? Because we hold these unrealistic expectations and standards when the person who's actually winning is to your point, is the person who's actually getting it done. That's all,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
The only difference between, you know, the idea and the business is the business is actually up and running. The idea is still
Yeah.
stuck in your head, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Man, that's powerful the way you put that. So let's um let's talk about the relationship between you as a father and your sons, but the message you're trying to hopefully one day relay when they go back and listen to previous episodes of the Dear Son podcast. Because when I listen to the show, it makes me think of like this is your last will and testament, like the thing that they're gonna be able to pick up and go, man, this is what Dad was talking about, and this is the things. Talk to me. Is there some of that in there as you've kind of built this out? And what are you trying to get across to them? What do you want them to see when they're 39 and 40 and
Yeah.
41? What do you want them to take away from what you're building with this?
Man, that's a great question. And yes, there's some of that in there. But for me, this process is the hack to me compressing, excuse me compressing the timeline of them getting that information versus the time horizon it took me to get that information. So no, I don't want them to have to rely on this podcast to understand it. Going through this podcast process is facilitating more real time conversations with them that I wish that I had. So there's that dynamic. But essentially, like the thought behind it is a library of necessary conversations that the world can access as they need it if they don't have access to these conversations otherwise. The main thing I want to get that my kids that I want my kids to get from this process is that you can go do it, right? Like now I was writing to a podcast with my oldest son. He said, "Dad, I think I want to get into NFTs." I said, "Absolutely. Do some research and let's have a conversation about it because you can do it." Right? That wasn't necessarily how I grew up, and it wasn't that my parents were negative. They were from the generation of work 40 to 50 hours a week for 40 years and then retire, right? And then whatever's left of life of that success. Like aside but related. My dad sent me a text last week of the confirmation email of them paying off their house.
Wow.
73. My sister responded, it was in a group text, "Congratulations, first time homeowner." And I said, "Woo,
Mm.
they are the first." Yes, that's the first time of them. Oh, we've been paying for houses. We've always, there's always been a mortgage versus rent, but never actually owned it. That is what I want to accelerate generation by generation, having information, better information, faster, and be able to apply it in real time.
Man, that's uh that's a strong why, sir. that's
Yeah.
a that's a pretty strong why. You know, I think when you look at where you are today, um, what do you want 5 years from now? What do you want with the podcast? What do you want
Yeah.
with your marriage? What do you want
Yeah.
with this business? How do you see 5 years from now the decision to act right on getting this started and
Yeah.
moving this thing into the future? What does that look like?
Oh man, I mean that's number one. I want the marriage to still be healthy and dope. First and foremost, I want family to be healthy. I want my kids to be moving in their purpose. that is the, again, like this is demonstration, right? This is more than above me getting over myself and all of that. This is, you can do it, and I support you doing it. Watch me as an example, learn, do it better. But I want them to have at least the older three to have identified their purpose and figure out a way to be happy in their purpose and earn an income. My youngest will still be in middle school. But for this, I really see the podcast. I don't see it going away, but I see it as a stepping stone. Ultimately, my goal is to tell beautiful Black stories responsibly, right? Whether it's conversations like this, whether it's through short films or documentaries, I want to be a media imprint that facilitates that message outside of just the fatherhood space. I want to give people opportunities. Like for me, like when my dad sent that message about them paying off their house, a selfish part of me was a little like, I was mad at myself because I wanted to do that for them. I hadn't positioned myself to do that. And that's how I grade myself, right? Eventually, the dynamic in the family, and I'm claiming that the younger generation won't have to have a responsibility to help the older generation, because the older generation figured it out, right? They're paying it forward and they're creating opportunities for the generations to come. But at least in my family and our community, like, there's this always, got to take care of mama. And you should. I don't want my kids to have to take care of me. I want it to stop with us, right? Well, we put enough information into them. We put systems in place. We have business to which they can, they can have a stake in, or, use to facilitate what they want to do, and perpetuate that through the generations to come. That don't worry about the reach back up. Make sure that next couple of generations is positioned, and that's how I see legacy.
Man,
So I hope I gave you an answer somewhere in there.
oh yeah, no, I appreciate the honesty. I mean, I think that for many of us, right, sometimes I think we wait too late to think that way, right? And not saying, it's I don't know, I think it's the kind of the difference between, man, I kind of feel selfish wanting to make all the money now, and realizing, but if I don't, how is my children gonna get ahead, right? Like, yeah. So it's living in between that, right? And knowing that it's actually okay to enjoy the now while also building for the future, right? And everybody's gonna figure out what their version is, right? So as we kind of wrap up here, I would like to understand the Derek that was 10 years ago. Where was he mentally? What was going on? What was happening? And the Derek now who has his sights on this larger goal and context. And we've talked personally about some of that, but like, you've got like your sights on something. What was the 10 years ago you doing, and kind of what was happening up here, and what's happening now? Like, why do you get up and do this every day? Because you don't have to. I mean, you could just go off and be comfortable. Like, what's the drive?
That one stings, man. The 10 years ago, especially thinking about the specific, like 2012. 2012, I moved into management and I crossed the 6-figure mark, right? And that's a thing that everybody's like, 6 figures, 6 figures, 6 figures. And that's not this. I'm not saying that for any other reason than context. What that did was that became the drug. I got to get to the next position. I got to get to the next position. I got to get to the next position. So I work for an international, the company I work for has an international presence, literally on all 7 continents. So there was always a reason to travel. And I saw that as a means of getting ahead. No, let me go to the site. It was a need in part. It was a need to do that in my role, and I wanted to do it excessively. So let me take this trip. Let me take this trip. Let me take this trip. And my family became lesser and lesser and lesser important. And it hurts me to say it, but that is honest. We can always, my family is my why. They're the reason I do it. Stop lying. Stop lying, right? Sometimes you just want to get ahead, and you want to get ahead.
Yep.
One thing I realized, quick aside, is that all of what I was doing in the vein of providing for my family, I never talked to my family about if they wanted what I was providing.
Ooh.
Like, did this actually equate to a good life for you, or am I overcompensating by making Christmas fantastic and birthdays fantastic because I'm not here, and when I'm here, I'm thinking about not being here? Hurts this. I feel like, I mean, I was trash 10 years ago. 10 years, the point blank period, I was trash. I was successful, trash. What has clicked over time is being afforded opportunities, having my health impacted, seeing things happen in my family, giving me these aha moments that I wish it didn't take for me to realize what was important. Realizing that all of these things that I was saying about God got it. God wasn't putting me, I don't think God put me in every situation that I was in. He got me out of a lot of them. And I have a real problem when people say, God put me through it. Well, did he put you through it, or did he take you through it because you put yourself, right? I became very acutely aware of it. Does my walk match the talk? And I wasn't happy with it. And, I started other bad habits, drinking, hanging out, doing all these other things as a means of ultimately forgetting how trash of a person that I was during that period, man. And the aha moment, I think it happened over time. I don't think it was like a single, I woke up one day and I was better. I just became more aware of what things were important in life. And again, like I said, seeing things happen, seeing people in my family pass away, really looking at my wife and I to see how she felt about like how it impacted her, my activities, my actions, looking at my kids and not being able to look at my kids. If you understand what I'm saying,
Man, yeah.
It was enough. It was enough. So, I had to put some things down, some actions away, some behaviors I had to put to rest, and slowly start working on me being happy with who I am. And that's a journey to this day. The money, the none of that changed. And I haven't had a significant, in my perspective, amount of money to where I'm just, I could take a few years off and kind of wade through life. But none of it matters. I've seen the executive level. I've operated at the highest level in my organization for my company. And it's a great placeholder on my resume. But that's not how I want to lead the story.
That is powerful because I agree with you. I like to call it the golden handcuffs. I think when corporate starts throwing you money, they are also stealing more than they're giving you. Yeah. Sometimes some of us don't wake up until you're too deep in it and you realize I'm in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and I thought I was standing on shore. Nope, you're not. Yeah. You know what I mean? And you ain't got a lifeboat. Here's something cool. So as you were sharing that story, I was thinking about Ash Cash. He has a great podcast, The Vault, and he said something one time that's related to what you were talking about. He talked about how, the GPS works, and that the GPS, you put in your destination, but you might be the reason that you got off early, right? You're the reason that you took the wrong turn. What the GPS does not do is take you all the way back to the beginning. It literally reroutes you from where you are. And I think that's what God did in your life. I think that's what he did in my life. I think that's what he does for everybody. He's not going to take us all the way back to the beginning, but he's always pointing true north every time we get off too early, right?
That's good.
Every time we get off too early, he's always saying, hey, let's reroute, right? And I can still get you there. And I think it's so cool to see where you are on your navigation of life, and what's to come, man. I think it's so cool to see this side of you, right? I think it's so cool that your wife has been willing to see the prism turn, right, in the many different colors of who you are, right? That you have your children, that you've made the commitment to your family, and that y'all gonna figure it out no matter what, right? I think it's
absolutely.
super dope. So lastly, last question for you is this, man. The Dear Son podcast is up. Tell everybody how they can find you. Tell everybody, some of the things that you're working on and how they can also grab some of this merch because it is awesome. Go ahead and tell everybody.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. So the Dear Son podcast is literally everywhere. It's on Apple, Spotify, Google, Anchor, Podbean, Stitcher. It's on Audible. Type in Dear Son, comma, and it'll pop up. I guarantee it. I also provide a visual experience on YouTube, the Dear Son podcast. I am the Dear Son podcast on social media, on IG and Facebook. On Twitter, it is just Dear Son podcast. As Chris mentioned, the family brand, you can find that at johnsandcompany.co, JOHNS and company.co. Get your fix for everything Healthy Marriage is Dope. I also want to plug the Healthy Marriage is Dope podcast that I do with my wife. We release on Fridays. You can find that podcast on the same platforms. What's next for the show, man, is more meaningful conversations. If you don't know, Chris graced the stage as well on my platform. It'll be, I don't know if it'll be out when this one is released, but look for it at some point. It's a fantastic episode. It really is. I appreciate him. I'm just looking to elevate the show, man. I'm still working on, broadening the audience. I'm just trying to stay consistent, but I got some ideas about how to elevate the show, bring in different perspectives, but not losing the essence of what the show is intended to do. It is a show about fatherhood for fathers, those with fathers, and the fatherless. So no one is excluded. Thank you for sharing your platform, man. This has been a joy. You took me down the road like I take people down the road, and I appreciate being on this side of it. So thank you.
Absolutely, man. Listen, if you all want to grab all of the stuff the Dear Son podcast has and Healthy Marriage is Dope, the links will be down in the description below. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This has been The World According to Chris, where we help you build the perfect side business. I hope that right now, listening to this conversation, maybe it should have sparked some interest. Here's what I would like for you to do. If you've heard this and you found something that will help you in this message, share, like, comment, leave a rating, talk about this, but more importantly, go do something. Go put action behind that energy that now you feel. Don't let the moment of the emotion be more important than the actions that you take. That's why we're here, and that's what we want to be able to help you do. So thank you, Derek. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. This has been the World According to Chris podcast. We out.